One. What's up, comic book fans? Pete here from Comic Books Transformed, where we talk about the comic book the movie and TV adaptations of your favorite comic books. But today we're talking about something that has nothing to do with comic books whatsoever. We're talking about the show The Peripheral, which just ended. Danny, that's my co-host over there. He's also on my other channel, The Lassercast. Dr. Zayas God, did you like the last episode of The Peripheral?
Yeah. I thought it was pretty good. A lot of the uh I liked a lot of the discussions that took place. I thought they were very interesting. I love how the episode starts with like a cold open of when Connor was in the hospital after getting effectively blown up and losing three of his limbs, and he's talking to Flynn about how he would really love a reboot, and that comes full
Full circle.
circle
Yeah.
at the end where, spoiler, Flynn is able to effectively, correct me if I'm wrong, create like a new timeline so that she can like go after uh the research institute before they become like the jackpot creators that we know they become. And she basically, almost in Walking Dead fashion, asks Connor to, shoot her and like kill her off from her timeline.
Yes.
It's kind of, it felt like that Walking Dead moment of like, I'm gonna go look at the flowers.
Yeah. So you bring up the kind of the most controversial part of the episode, the very end of the episode right away, and I think that's a good thing because there's a lot to discuss about that. She asked Connor to shoot her, and for the one timeline, the timeline that the whole show has been taking place in, Flynn is now dead, and they've done things like this in other shows before. Like it's not like her consciousness gets transferred into another body or something. Like that character is dead now, and like sort of like a saved version of Flynn, saved from like a couple of minutes before she logged off and had herself die, is going to continue the adventure, but like before things had gotten too out of hand, you
Yeah.
know. And so like they've done this before in other TV shows, and it kind of bothers me because I think when you think about a character, you like to think that they are alive and they see the entire adventure. But that version of Flynn that we have been watching is gone. Like she's dead. She got shot in the head, you
Yeah.
know? And they've done this before, like on Star Trek Picard. I guess spoilers for that show. There's a couple of shows, I think like maybe like Rick and Morty, where it's like, okay, the character's dead. And you're like, oh, okay, that was the one I was invested in. And I guess you're saying this is like the same one, but it's not, It's like she's slightly different now. It's a different person, different timeline. Does that bother you?
I mean, there's part of me that feels like it kind of negates a lot of the whole, like, getting to know this character and getting to know her universe if we're just going to move on to a different universe.
Yeah.
But I also feel like my biggest issue with this show for its first season was that it didn't progress the overarching plot uh, far enough for me. And we've talked about in the course of these now 8 reviews of the Peripheral on Prime that there's too much going on. There's all
Yeah.
these really great science fiction elements,
Right, right.
but they're kind of being bogged down by an excess of characters who are doing things that don't it, they probably affect the plot, but it doesn't feel like they do.
I
There's a
agree.
there's a scene in this episode with Jasper where Jasper kind of, severs the ties that bind him. And like at the same time I was like, okay, fine, because this character, like, he just felt extraneous to everything going on. Like, why did we need this character in the show? But now, so like, part of me is like, the final episode is wasting time with Jasper and his like 3 friends whose names I don't even know.
One of them was Atticus.
Yes. And then he like drops them off on the railroad tracks to be murdered. And I'm like, okay, so maybe Jasper is going to become an important character in season 2 now that he's like cut the ties from here. But it, I almost don't. I feel like, to answer your question, most of the time it would bother me that we're leaving this world behind. But I feel like we've spent too much time in this world and I'm ready to move on. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like the characters who have the important stuff that I care about are the 2032 characters, but the world I want to see more of is the future. And so I'm kind of stuck in this middle ground with
Right.
the show. And I feel like, I feel like this episode did a good job of progressing my interest in seeing a season 2, because it's leaving an entire world that I was kind of done with behind. And now
Yes.
I'm like ready to get into the real science fiction-y stuff of this series.
Yeah.
So I feel like just to give you an analogy, when Lost season 2 ended, Lost
Okay.
season 1 I think is undisputably one of the greatest seasons of television ever.
Okay.
Lost season 2 was tremendously disappointing, to the point where I remember saying, when season 3 comes back, I'm going to watch the first episode, but if that first episode does not grab me right away, I am done. I can't keep on going with this.
Sure.
And I dropped Lost immediately after
Oh,
that
wow.
first episode of season 3. Now, eventually, as a condition of my relationship with Athena, who is a
Right.
Lost super fan,
Right.
I had to get back into it, and I ended up watching all of Lost.
Oh, okay.
I feel like that's how I feel with this show right now, where it's like, okay, I'm still intrigued. I like a lot of the science fiction aspects of it. I'm gonna give the first episode or two of the next season a shot.
Right.
They gotta hook me right away, and if they don't, I think I'm gonna be okay just kind of like leaving the show behind. But I don't want that to happen. I actually want the show to hook me, because there's so much cool shit in this show. There's so much good science fiction that I feel is left to be untapped. The acting is really good. I like a lot of the characters, so I want to see this world continue, but I am also kind of cautious.
Totally understand. Totally understand. And one point that you brought up was that there's like way too many characters, or it feels like there's way too many characters. Um, I wonder how much of this show is an embellishment upon the previous, or I'm sorry, embellishment upon what's in the book. Like, how much stuff did they add from the book? When you look at the way that this season ends, it feels kind of like a natural stopping point for a book if you're making a trilogy, right? Because it's kind of like, okay, well, they killed off Flynn in one timeline, they're kind of starting over. That's a good ending for a first book, right?
Yeah, and then
Uh,
and
right,
I feel like a lot of the characters have that kind of like uh natural kind of like, ooh, I can't wait to see what's going to happen next. Like even Ash like turns on Lev, and like her and her boyfriend are now working for Charisse and the Research Institute. And the detective, what's her name?
Ainsley.
Yeah, who I love. She's like, she's working with Flynn to try to prevent the jackpot from happening. And there's like so many like, even Jasper to an extent. Like Jasper, he's cut all of his ties with his uncle's, business dealings and criminal organizations. And you're like, okay, there's natural ending points for all these characters. So yeah, it does kind of feel like the end of a book, or the end of like part one of a story.
Right.
Yeah. So in that respect, I'm looking forward to seeing where things pick up.
Yeah. I just it did feel like spinning wheels a lot. And there even were things in this episode where I'm like, okay, well, I don't really care about this Ash girl. And finally, after so many reviews, I finally realized her name is Ash, which you think I should remember, like Ash from Evil Dead, Ash from Alien, pretty memorable name, right? But she meets with Charisse, and she's basically, like you said, saying, okay, I'm going to betray Lev, and Flynn has all this special information that Alita stole in her mind, so we got to get rid of her. And Charisse says, okay, well, I'm going to speed up the jackpot too. Um, Ash asks Charisse to get rid of Lev, like to totally just wipe him out. And Charisse says that she's going to move up this apocalyptic event to wipe out Flynn. And so that's part of the reason why Flynn decides to have herself killed in that one timeline, in that one stub, is to potentially prevent this event that's supposed to happen. There's supposed to be this right-wing group that's supposed to blow up this missile silo that's right near where she lives. And she thinks that when she dies, that Charisse isn't going to care about that anymore, and she's not going to blow up that missile silo.
Plus,
so we'll see. Go ahead.
Plus, what I feel is going to be based on Flynn telling Connor, like, I'm going to kill that bitch. I'm like, oh, so she is going in her new stub, her new timeline. She's going to start stalking and hunting Charisse.
Yes.
Who probably in that timeline doesn't even know who Flynn is. And that, I'm hoping, will provide some great moments of television for season 2. Like, you know, all of the interactions between Chloe Grace Moretz and Tanaya Miller, the few times they've been on screen together, there's been like really cool tension, really good chemistry between them. And if you can like reverse that dynamic where now Flynn, Chloe Grace Moretz is doing the like stalking and hunting of Charisse.
Yeah, the intimidating,
Yeah, I think that could be very interesting. I think that could be a lot of fun.
Agreed. I mean, they have great casting, and I really appreciate Chloe Grace Moretz in this. There's this whole dynamic for this show where you have sort of like this aristocratic British or different ethnicities or whatever, or nationalities in the future, and everybody talks in a very formal way. Then you have the people that are in the past in America, and they are very country and seeming like, you know, they grew up on a farm, and there's that big contrast between the two. And it always seems like the people in the future are more sophisticated and more powerful, and essentially Flynn takes that power back in this episode. You mentioned Lost before, and the way that Flynn gets the upper hand in this is that she essentially has the detective open up a new stub, and then she destroys whatever sort of tracking mechanism can track where she is in the stub. And I felt like that was very Lost-like, because she's like, can you open a portal to a new stub? And then there's this sort of like clear black screen, and it has different timelines on it. And then she like pushes a button, and a box opens up, and a watch is in there. And I felt like for something that's sort of like a science fiction, like, you know, it's a science fiction concept, right? Where it's like we're using a machine to create new timelines. Having like a watch, an old-fashioned watch that would be in someone's pocket, I feel like that's like a very fantasy type element, you know? And so she breaks that watch, and then it's like she's at a time where Charisse is not going to be able to find her. And so that's how she gets that power. But I, to be completely honest, I did not really understand all of that myself. I felt like that was a little confusing.
I think my biggest problem with Lost was always it felt so MacGuffin-y, and like everything about it was set up to intrigue the audience, but they never paid off any of that. The hatch, the numbers, the black smoke monster. It was all MacGuffins to just get you to keep watching. And there was an element of that, like, oh, you mean after 8 episodes, we can just open up open up this door, and like the Research Institute has 4 peripherals, and that's it. That's the entire like defense of this super important place.
That's a good point.
Is 4 robots that are easily disposable.
Yeah.
Like that didn't exactly feel like, if this is such an important thing that can like reshape the timelines of the world, you probably want more than 4 robots uh defending it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I that scene I thought had some good elements, but it also felt a little hollow in a way. And
Yeah.
I'm still, I still come back to the fact that, like, Flynn's entire involvement in this starts with her effectively putting on this like headset in episode 1, thinking it's basically like a video game,
Yeah.
and ending up like finding this the god font in the future with Alita. And they very they come back to it a little bit in this episode where Wilf and Alita meet in like the and she's trying to open up his memories as to what happened. So I'm sure that'll be a big part of season 2.
Right.
But like I feel if you're just a casual viewer of content, if you're a casual, like, oh, this show on Amazon Prime looks interesting, maybe I'll watch an episode or two. If you watch that first episode, you would think that there's going to be so much more explanation of why Flynn even becomes this character, that
Yeah.
the future is trying to wipe her and everyone out that she effectively knows.
Right.
And it I never thought they did a good enough job of like tying that up. And I don't know, maybe there's going to be a lot in season 2 about what specifically, she has in her mind that's like causing her all these seizures and all of that information. And maybe she's going to finally get to interact with Alita. And, I don't want, like, I know you're big, you always talk about how you hate exposition dumps. I feel like
Right.
this show needed at least one
Yeah.
of like Alita and her almost a little bit more of what was going on with her and her initial plan and the information that got passed to Flynn in that first episode.
Yeah, yeah. This is the kind of show where you really need to be paying attention. Like if you're like on your phone or something, I take notes when I watch these shows and stuff too. Like if you get distracted or if you're not focusing completely on what they're saying, it's very easy to like not understand what's going on or get off task. I think even when you are paying attention, it's kind of easy to not understand what's going on.
Oh,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
in full disclosure, there were a lot of times this season where I had to like pause and rewind 20 seconds to like try to make meaning of what was said, because I either, like I looked at a text message, or I, saw how the world was being destroyed on Twitter. And I even in this episode, like I was like, wait, did she just ask Connor to let me hold on? And I
Right.
like, and yeah, I feel like this show, there's so much information in it that demands your attention, and there's parts of the show that really do hold your attention, but then there's parts where, like, did you watch the post-credit scene?
Yes. Who
I, I
cares?
it, like we have been raised.
Yeah.
I'm saying this as we're both 40-year-old men. We've been raised. It's like entertainment. Like the MCU changed everything with the concept of like the post-credit scene.
Right. Right.
So we've been trained to believe that if there's something in the post-credits, it's going to be super important. It's going to set up a sequel. It's going to introduce a new character. It's going to do something that is going to leave us walking out of the movie theater going, oh, shit.
Right.
Or the MCU got to a point where they just started making jokes of them, and we're all going to walk out going, oh, I can't believe we just sat around for that.
Right. Right.
This, I honestly, I would have just turned the show off.
Yeah.
But I finished the episode this morning in bed, and I was like, all right, the credits are rolling. I think I was about to message you to see if you were like ready to go.
Yeah.
And then like all of a sudden it came back on, and I was like, oh. And Lev walks into a restaurant
Right,
where the like Russian mafia is there,
right.
and they basically, in like this overly complicated, like really poorly comedic way, tell him that he has to, you know, cut down the trees in the in the forest, in his orchard. In other words, I'm assuming they want him to kill Ash and her boyfriend, who are like, who have turned on him.
Yes.
And I'm like, that's what you did for a post credit scene?
Yeah.
Like that was your big, like, tune in next season to watch Lev go after his, traitorous allies. I'm like, really?
Uh,
It
I
just,
I wasn't 100% sure that was what they meant. I took it like there could be three ways. One could be that. The other one was that maybe they meant like you have to take out Flynn and her people, like from that stub. You have to wipe
yeah.
them out. That could be it. That's sort of more intimidating. The other one was that it could be you have to take out all the stubs, get rid of all the other realities. Maybe it's that. That's more exciting too.
I
But
mean,
go ahead.
any of those, that scene,
Yeah.
the fact that we're like sitting here debating what did they mean,
Right. Right.
and it's just a very bad post credit scene. It doesn't intrigue me at all
Right.
to want to watch the next episode or tune in for the next season, which is probably 6 to 10 months away.
At least,
Like,
yeah.
and I'm just shocked that that was, you know, it feels like it was 30 years ago that Nick Fury
Oh, okay.
stumbled into Tony Stark's basement and said, "I want to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative," which I will go on YouTube right now and say that that's probably one of the most important lines ever uttered in the history of cinema.
Sure.
And because it literally in 2008, every fan who saw Iron Man, the
Yeah.
original Iron Man, walked out of that movie and went, "Oh my God, they're going to build a universe and link all these characters together."
Yeah.
And this does the opposite for me. Like this scene, I'm sitting there waiting for something to happen, thinking, I can't believe they made this as an end credit scene.
It's pretty rough, but you brought up a really, really interesting point. I think it's a point about storytelling in general too, is that there's scenes that make you lose interest, and so you start to check your phone, you start to do things, and then they put in another scene where it's like, oh no, you really need to know this because this affects what's going to happen. And I think that is an interesting flaw for this show to have, because it's like, well, why do we get bored in those scenes? Um, and I think that the main reason is the thing that we keep touching upon over and over again, that there's just too many characters and stuff like that, right? So when they cut to the future with just scenes with just Lev, or with scenes with just Ash or something like that, it just starts to get dull. But then they throw like an important piece of information in one of those scenes, and you're like, okay, so you're not invested in those characters at all. You don't care about those characters at all, but they're the ones that have all the information. And so, you kind of start to tune out. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute, they just disclosed something that's real important to the whole plot of this. And I don't care. Like, with this show, it's interesting to think about the people that are involved in the background of it, right? Because, or in front of the camera too. Like Chloe Grace Moretz, I kept thinking about how she has a lot of like karate scenes or like scenes where she's doing martial arts, right? And it's like, well, that makes sense because that's how she started her career, right? As like Hit Girl in Kick-Ass,
Kick-Ass.
right?
Yeah.
And so she's used to that kind of fighting and stuff like that. So this is like second nature to her. And then I also sent you a link to that video by Gunship called "When You Grow Up, Your Heart Dies," and she's in that video a lot too. It kind of was making me happy about this show. But then there's also Jonathan Nolan, who is Christopher Nolan's brother, and he's a showrunner. He did that show Person of Interest on CBS. He did Westworld, and I think that they make these shows where things are metaphorical sometimes and things are very literal sometimes. Like they're literal science fiction of like, we need this device that's going to do this. And then they're metaphorical of like, you know, this is a reboot of our life. And here's this watch. It's like, what the fuck? And I think that it's very easy to lose your focus in such a thing because if it's like just straight science fiction, then your brain tells you, okay, you need to pay attention because they're telling you important details that affect the actual plot. When it starts to become oracle, then you kind of tune out, and you're like, okay, well, they're just sort of just having a conversation for like
And
dramatic flourish.
and I think exactly to your point, it's the difference between the Matrix and the Matrix sequels. The Matrix walked that line perfectly. It had a perfect amount of characters. It gave you the expositional dialogue, but all of the dialogue in the original Matrix was incredibly interesting. To the point where, you know, here we are 20 something years later, we still quote the Matrix all the time. And then in the sequels, they just kept involving more and more characters who had these long conversations about nothing. And, and to the point where by the time you got back to an action sequence, you didn't even care about the action sequences.
Right. And I usually don't care about the action sequences on this show too. And one thing too, in the future, they really are playing up Wilf. Like, especially when you watch the first episode, you're like, oh, this Wilf is gonna be a big character. He's gonna have this chemistry with Chloe Grace Moretz. But honestly, those are the times where I tune out a lot too. I think that you actually kind of like Wilf and you like their chemistry, but their interactions, I think that the main reason why they focus on him so much is to give you a likable, relatable character in that future time where a lot of people are either
Yeah.
like cold scientists or they're
I
criminals. Go
Do you
ahead.
know what I found myself thinking during this episode? I found myself thinking, instead of the multiple timelines that the show is focusing on, I almost feel I would have liked this better as a narrative, linear show that just, you know, show us Wilf and Alita, their story. Show because it felt almost like V for Vendetta V for Vendetta in like the flashback scenes where they show like England falling to fascism,
Hmm.
and that's what it felt like when you got to see a little bit of the flashbacks of Wilf and Alita growing up, and then they're adopted, and then they escape from their adopted family, who obviously are like, shitty people. And I almost would have liked to have just watched that story, or like stories of Flynn and Burton and their life in this, like, 10 years in the future, kind of like uh, what would 2032 be like if you had these, guys with haptic technology and they work for a local crime boss and there's serial killers running around. Like, give me that show. Like, when you combine all of these elements and all of these timelines together, it gets a little muddled.
Oh yeah,
And I think that's the main thing that we keep coming back to is we like parts of the show. We think the acting is good,
yeah,
but it's muddled. And I'm hoping, to get back to your first point, which was, how do I feel about an entire timeline being severed? I I think I'm good. Like, let's move on and let's, like, focus on something different.
yeah,
And maybe the show will pick up. I'm hoping it starts to pick up a little bit.
yeah. I mean, we'll see. We keep we keep saying every single episode that it's the amount of characters that makes it muddled, like you're saying, like it's too much, right? But I also think it's also the idea of the concepts that are in the show. Like at one point, I really wanted to touch on this point too. Um, Flynn and Wilfred are connected, and they do the little finger thing where they're like, "Okay, we're connecting our mind phones or whatever the fuck it is," and so they connect with each other so that she can help kind of go through his memories to see if he can find Alita. And they're doing that, and that alone in itself is a science fiction movie. We are now connected in our minds, and I'm going to go through your mind to find a memory that you have repressed. That's one concept. Then you go into another concept where he runs into Alita, and Alita has this implant that she's taken out of her ear. Now, I constantly forget about these implants because they're referenced every so often, and there's all this other stuff that's talked about all the time. But they say that like these implants help keep people alive in this future timeline where everything is fucking destroyed and there's viruses and things like that. So it's such an important detail that, oh, in the future you have to have an implant in your body to stay alive, but yet it's just kind of thrown out there, you know. But that's a super important detail. That in itself is a science fiction movie in itself. You have to have an implant, and then here's the twist: the implant actually suppresses your memory. And this group that Wilfred is involved with, the Klept, use that implant to suppress this idea that the Klept wiped out 5 million people in these camps at one point. That in itself is once again another story. That's that kind of V for Vendetta, you know, horrible fascist times kind of thing. You know, so there's all these concepts that get thrown in there. You know, there's peripherals, but then there's also androids. And the show alone, the show's called The Peripheral. And the thing is that like just the concept of a peripheral is very intriguing. You think you're going into a virtual reality, but you're going into a body essentially in a reality, right? And that's the way the show is marketed. It is like the Matrix in the sense of you're not exactly sure what it is. You kind of have an idea, but then it's like, no, 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 no. It's much deeper once you go further. And I like that. But there's just too many ideas in one.
Yeah.
And the way I felt like the show, at least watching the first episode, was going to be, I felt like it was really going to play up that whole video game aspect and be like, you think you're in a video game, but it's real life. And what's the correlation between how we view things in video games and how we view things in the real world? And it kind of strays every so often, and it goes more into like the time travel aspect than like the video game virtual reality kind of aspect.
Yeah.
It's like very, very ambitious. One last thing I want to say is that I have been looking up other reviews just so I can kind of make sense of everything and make sure I didn't miss any detail. And some reviewers give very detailed reviews of this happened and this happened and this is going to lead to this. Thank God for them. But I looked in the comments of one of them and they posted a poll, and the poll was like, would you keep watching The Peripheral? Are you enjoying The Peripheral? And on the poll, most people actually really enjoyed the show. They were very satisfied with the show. So maybe we're in the minority and thinking that the show isn't as good as we think it is, but I do feel like it needs to get tighter, or there needs to be something more engaging with the
Yeah.
future people for us to want to stay on board.
No, I 100% agree.
Yeah.
Um,
So, I mean, you know, I want to do one shout out too. There was a guy who commented on a couple of our videos for The Peripheral. His YouTube name was No Name, so I can't say, "Hey, Kevin, thank you, good job." But No Name, thank you for your contribution. One of his points that he made was that he's a huge fan of William Gibson's first three books, which are Neuromancer, Count Zero, and Mona Lisa Overdrive. And he said that they basically created the cyberpunk genre. But then he's saying that like his stuff beyond that, it was harder for him to get into. And I think that he was even having kind of trouble with the show. But thank you, No Name, for watching.
You said you've read Neuromancer?
I have not. Oh,
okay.
Yeah. I have a book by another author called Snow Crash, which that's another one that gets credited for starting the cyberpunk genre. That's a different author altogether. Another guy who writes like real dense, confusing material too. So I can't remember his fucking name now. But anyway, was there anything else you wanted to say about The Peripheral?
No.
Okay. Well, we close the door on that.
I think we got it all out. I think we're both in the same boat. I genuinely think for the purposes of this channel, if season 2, you know, if there's a season 2, which there you know probably will be, it's Amazon Prime. I think we almost have to tread lightly. I think we need to watch the first episode or two, before we commit to covering a full season. And if we're enjoying what we're watching, then we can go into a season 2 review. But I think we also have to be willing to cut bait. We both have, between the Lasser cast and all the horror movies and all the horror shows that we talk about on the Lasser cast, between all of the movies and TV shows that you and Brian cover on this channel, uh, you know, there's only so much time in a day for us to watch content. And if we're not really enjoying the content, I feel like that's something that I have come to grips with in this modern world of streaming.
Right.
Is I feel like when I was younger, I was a much more of a completist, where like if I started something, if it was a horror series, if it was anything, I had to finish it. And I feel like I'm 40, I have kids, I'm I work, we have a YouTube channel. I I only have so much time in a day, and if I'm not enjoying something, I'm not going to waste my time covering it and watching it and then talking about it. So I've become a lot more comfortable cutting bait on programming and content that I'm not enjoying, and I I think we've both enjoyed parts of this show. I feel like if I was grading season 1, I'd probably give it a C plus, or like maybe like as a teacher, I'd give it about a 65 or a 70, where
Yeah.
like it passes, but it can do a lot better. And like you would tell the student, I know you can do better. If you try, you have 90, 95 potential,
Yeah.
but you're only getting a 70.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the Peripheral season 1 in a nutshell. It's got a ton of untapped potential, uh, and I'm going to be willing to see how it goes in season 2, but I'm also willing to cut bait.
Yeah. Yeah. You have potential. Do a little extra credit. Get rid of this Lev shit. Won't be great, you know? So, yeah, no. I agree with you there. There's a couple of shows that we've tried for this channel that we just haven't gotten into. One was like Superman and Lois. I was covering that with Pepper, and just it kind of became like a chore for her to watch Superman and Lois. Sorry for you Superman and Lois fans out there. There's a couple of MCU shows that Brian and I watch where we're like, oh man. Well, luckily there's only like 5 of these, but I totally agree with you. You want to put your time, your valuable time, into shows that are going to have a payoff for you. So anyway,
Yeah.
hopefully you guys have put your time into our channel, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe to Comic Books Transformed. You can also catch me and Danny over on the Lasser Cast. I have one more author interview that I'm in the middle of editing. That'll come over onto the Lasser Cast. These guys that wrote Dead Friend Society, Peter Hall and Paul Gandersman. It's a great book. I definitely recommend checking it out, and checking out that interview this week. Danny, what do you got on the Lasser Cast this week?
Charlotte and Charlotte actually finished Wednesday without me.
Oh,
I let her because I was out late last night. So you can check out our review of episodes 1 through 4, and we will be doing an episode covering. We'll be doing a review of episodes 5 through 8. And doing a review of the first season, speaking about shows that we genuinely love, because Wednesday is fantastic. Also, I am covering the New York City Horror Film Festival. I posted a review of Thursday night. Saw this really cool horror movie called Candyland and a few really cool shorts. I was there all day yesterday. I saw 2 features, a bunch of shorts, met a bunch of cool people. So I'll be doing a review of the Saturday night, and then I'll be doing a review of what I see today, because I'm heading back there this afternoon. They have some shorts programs. So if you're into like indie horror and new up and coming filmmakers, check out the Lassercast, because I'm doing reviews of a whole bunch of movies from the New York City Horror Film Festival.
boom. Perfect. Okay, yeah. So go over to the Lasser Cast, guys, and check that out too. On Comic Books Transformed, we are going to be covering Doom Patrol, which is coming back this week. And then also, I'm trying to get Brian on board. I think he is on board, though, for the Willow Disney Plus show, because I'm enjoying that right now, too. So,
Is it good? Because I know Athena loves the movie,
yeah.
and we had talked about maybe watching the show.
Right.
And if the show, how many episodes is the show?
I don't know total. So far, they've only released 2. It's probably like 8. But it's fun. You know, it's a little goofy, and there's definitely things that you can kind of call from a mile away. But you know, I am a big fan of Warwick Davis. I think he's actually a really good actor. And when he comes on the show, you're like, oh yeah, this is great. Show me more of him. There's a whole bunch of supporting cast characters that you could maybe give her, you know, you could get rid of or keep. But I think it's worth checking out. I'd like to hear what you think about it too.
Yeah, I'm if Athena and Charlotte want to watch it, I'll definitely watch it. I can live without having watched Willow, the TV series, but if they're into it, if they want to give it a shot, I'll definitely give it a shot.
Yes. And once they get that Howard the Duck reboot coming back, we gotta get that one too.
Oh God.
All right. Well, that's been me and Danny talking about season 1 of The Peripheral. Maybe we'll see you guys for season 2. But otherwise, have a good weekend.